You know John Stossel is the winner of 19 Emmys, the co-anchor of ABC's 2020, and the author of a nationally best-selling book. Today, many of you, for the first time, will also get to know him as a champion in the cause of freedom. Please welcome John Stossel.
Thank you, Professor Chambliss. I'd like to talk about what I learned in my 30 years of reporting so that maybe you can learn from my mistakes. I started as a consumer reporter, and I started with the attitude that most young reporters have, maybe many of you, which is that, the world is a pretty scary place, and capitalism is okay, brings us some stuff, but by and large it's cruel and unfair. And so we need government to protect us from them, regulation and lawyers to protect us from the greed of the capitalists. And there were lots of stories I could do along those lines, and I did them night after night for years, plenty of examples where companies were ripping people off. The Coffee Institute was running ads saying, "Coffee's the drink that picks you up while it calms you down." So we called them up and said, "How can you say this? It's contradictory." "Well, we have research that backs this up." "Really? What's the research?" "Well, we surveyed thousands of people. We asked them, what do you get out of your coffee break?" Some people said it picked them up. Some people said it calmed them down. Somebody was selling solar-powered clothes dryers, just $50. You send in your money and you got a clothesline. So this is why we consumer activists said, got to regulate these advertisements. You got to have a Federal Trade Commission. And intuitively, we all say, there are cheats out there, there are dangerous things. We need these regulations to protect us from that. It's intuitive, but after watching the regulators work, and perhaps as a TV reporter, I had an unusual ringside seat on the regulatory estate. After watching them work, I now have to conclude they don't make us safer. They make life worse and more expensive. They make us less safe. Unintended consequences of the rules. Now, how can I say this? Well, first of all, there's the cost of what they do. The least of it is what you pay in direct cost, the taxes you pay that pays the bureaucrats in Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. The real cost is the indirect cost. All the creative energy that's now lost, going not to creating better products or teaching people better, but into just obeying the rules, forming the trade associations to lobby the politicians, going to Washington, forming the PAC, paying the lawyers to just figure out what the rules are and fill out the forms. All that creative energy lost. You have some of the smartest kids in colleges now going not into science or engineering or medicine, they're going to law school because that's where the money is now. But that doesn't make America happier or richer or freer. It just makes more rules. Now, the rules seem like they make sense. We have price gouging rules here in Florida. So when the hurricane comes, the bad, greedy people can't charge you a ton of money for gasoline. And emotionally, this feels right. But the result is everybody's hurt. Well, most everybody's hurt, because a few people get in there early and they stock up on gasoline. They buy more than they need because nobody's raising the price. And then everybody else afterward can't get any, or you have long gas lines. The gas lines of the 1970s were caused by price controls. When they were lifted, people said the price of gas will go up, it'll be terrible. But instead, the lines disappeared, the price went up for a day, and then it went down, because market competition dispenses these goods better. If there's a high price for something, that means people will come in to supply it. If you want someone to give up their weekend at grandma's and to drive a tanker filled with gasoline from Michigan to Florida, high prices inspires people to do that. And that gets people to the gasoline and then brings the prices down. We have Florida state licensing of roofing contractors. Now, again, intuitively this makes sense. I want to make sure the roof is safe, that it doesn't fall down in my head, that people aren't ripped off by leaky roofs, if the regulation really did prevent that. Half the time it doesn't even work. But the other result, the unintended consequence of the regulation, is that you're not allowed to pay Fred to come down from Tennessee to fix your roof. You can't even pay a neighbor to help, a handy carpenter neighbor who's not licensed. It's illegal in Florida. The result is everybody loses more as the roofs don't get repaired. What really convinced me that the regulations weren't working is that I soon saw that whatever the unintended consequence was, it didn't even work on the obvious crooks. The people selling the breast enlargers and the burn fat while you sleep pills, they kept getting away with it. They're still getting away with it. What would happen is the Attorney General might come after them, and they would hire a sleazy defense lawyer who would hold off the regulator for 5 years because the courts are so slow. And then they would just change the name of the product or move to a different state. The regulations really burdened the good companies that were going to be in business for 10 or 20 or 300 years. It added costs that we, the consumers, end up paying. The more I watched the market work and the regulators work, the more I saw that the regulators don't do it as well as the market, that markets police themselves on their own pretty well. Yes, there are Enrons and some terrible scams, but what I was seeing as a national consumer reporter is that I was having trouble finding truly national scams. The scams were little local scams. What happens in the market is that if information gets out, the scammers don't get away with much very long. People wise up. And the people who get rich, the Bill Gates of the world, they're giving us stuff we want. Business people can't force you to buy their products. They have to entice you by giving you something we need. Market forces, I soon saw, were working to protect people even in areas where intuitively we wouldn't think they'd work. As an example, let's look at the greedy, profit-driven companies that have employed me. I've worked for all the three of the biggest networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. They get all their profits from advertisers. So you'd think they'd let advertisers run the show. But they don't. They all have boards of censors that review the ads that come in and demand changes in them, demand 2 studies for a medical claim, reject some of the money outright. Why? Why would they do that? Because they figured out that if they police their own advertising and they don't have a reputation of being an environment for sleaze, I wonder what the sign language for sleaze is. If they're not thought of as an environment for sleaze, then they'll make more money from their good advertisers. Or how about the fact that I was a consumer reporter for years? I was paid to bite the hands that fed me. I insulted the very people who paid the bills. Did stories on aspirin makers that were advertising on ABC, and sometimes they'd pull out big accounts or sue. Now, when consumer reporting began, Ralph Nader said, "You'll never see it on commercial TV because the commercial stations won't want to offend their sponsors. You'll only see it on public TV." 30 years later, the opposite is true, which is the case with a lot of what Ralph says. There is no consumer reporting on public TV because the timid bureaucrats in charge are too nervous about offending anybody. But there are consumer reporters on most commercial TV stations. Why? Why would they insult all these advertisers? Again, because the market works in surprising ways. Because businesses have to please their customers. And in the case of a TV station, the customers are the viewers, and they soon figured out that more of you would watch a news program that gave honest information about sponsors, too. And yes, they'd lose some money when advertisers got mad, but they could charge the remaining advertisers more because they had higher ratings. The market will protect us. Now, when I say this, people say, maybe for trivial stuff like that. But when it comes to the important things, whether we're safe, whether we live or die or healthy, then you got to have these regulations. You got to have OSHA to protect the workers, and the FDA and the DEA and the CPSC and the whole alphabet soup of agencies we have growing in Tallahassee and Washington. And again, intuitively, makes sense. There are risks out there I don't know about. Let's have our wise elites make good decisions for all of us. But now, after watching them work, I again have to conclude, they make life less safe because the regulations, by interfering with the market, which is nothing more than the free wishes of millions of free people, by interfering with that, you always create nasty, unexpected side effects, and they're worse. Let's look at it as a thought experiment in two areas. Let's look at the drug laws, legal and illegal. Illegal first. I have 2 teenage kids. Again, intuitively, I'm glad heroin and cocaine are illegal. They can't zip down to the neighborhood Eckert store and get high. Maybe it's being illegal will deter them. I don't know that it will deter them. There's the forbidden fruit effect. Maybe it makes it more appealing to kids. And we certainly aren't keeping them from getting it. As you students know, it's as easy to get as alcohol. And we can't even keep it out of prison, so I don't know how we think we're going to keep it out of America. So I'm not certain what the law has accomplished. I assume some people have been deterred, though even there I'm not sure, because in Holland, where marijuana is legal, fewer kids smoke. But let's say some people have been deterred, maybe. Not much gain. Maybe a certain percentage of Americans will abuse intoxicants no matter what the law is. I suspect that's true. But now I can see the unintended consequences of the law, and they're worse. I'll just list 4. There's the crime. I mean, the drug crime is not about people getting high and committing crimes. Cocaine and meth are the worst, and maybe they cause 1% of the drug crime. 99% of it is caused because it's illegal. It's on the black market. The sellers can't rely on the police to protect their private property, so they arm themselves and form gangs. And the buyers steal to pay the high prices. Nicotine and heroin, says the government, are roughly equally addictive. Yet no one's knocking over 7-Elevens to get Marlboros. It's the law that causes the drug crime. Secondly, we're corrupting police forces. We're asking cops who might make $20,000 a year to turn down a $20,000 bribe. Some don't. We're telling kids in poor neighborhoods that work is for suckers. I mean, why take an entry-level job with McDonald's, minimum wage, when your little brother can make more as a lookout for the drug dealers? And they're the role models in the neighborhood. The people with the best cars and the best clothing are the criminals. And we're creating unbelievably rich criminal gangs. We forget that Al Capone was created by alcohol prohibition. The gangs we're creating now are even richer. They'll soon be able to buy nuclear weapons. Osama bin Laden was funded partly by drug money. So why are we doing this? Well, to protect us from ourselves. But if that's a good thing to do in a free society, where does it end? Maybe chocolate cake should be illegal. Maybe the police should come into our homes and make us run laps and do push-ups. If it's the role of government to protect us from ourselves, then there is no end to how far government can intrude into your life. Let's look at the second layer of safety. Let's look at legal drugs, other part of that equation. Now here too, it's scary. There are snake oil sellers out there who might peddle some bad stuff. So I'm glad we have a Food and Drug Administration that wants to make sure the drugs are safe and effective. Makes sense. But again, the unintended consequences are harder to see. We have this Vioxx scare now. Everybody's talking about it. It might have caused all these problems. But Vioxx also killed pain without causing stomach bleeding. 30,000 Americans die from stomach bleeding every year. Don't they count in the equation? Nobody talks about that. Right now, this FDA bureaucracy has grown so much that if you want to get a new drug approved, it costs $500 million and takes 12 to 15 years. Again, I want to be safe. My first reaction is to say, fine, let's make sure the drugs are safe. But think about the unseen part. Some years ago, the FDA proudly held a news conference and announced, this new heart drug we're approving, this new beta blocker will save 14,000 American lives a year. How come nobody stood up at the news conference and said, that's great, guys, but didn't this also mean that you killed 14,000 people last year? Nobody said that because reporters don't think that way, but it did mean that. The problem is that we can put the person who dies after taking Vioxx on the cover of the magazine. But who lived because Vioxx stopped the stomach bleeding that would have killed them, I don't know whose picture to take. I don't know who would be saved by the new heart drug. Right now in this 15-year process are fat substitutes, something that would let you eat all the chocolate cake you want and not get fat. Now, we're waiting because there's a tiny chance there's some carcinogen. They want to be sure. But thousands of people in this country die from being overweight every year. Don't they count? Not in government think. Because the regulator gets in trouble if he approves something that hurts someone, one person. But if thousands die because it's not approved, nobody's fired. Now, what am I saying? Not have an FDA? This sounds terrifying, and it's not going to happen. But as a thought experiment, think of the alternatives. I'll propose just two. First, why in a free country do we meekly sit back and let the government tell us you are forbidden to put that in your own body? Now, why couldn't the FDA be a voluntary agency? Companies that wanted to pay the $500 million would. Those of us who are cautious would only take those FDA-approved drugs. But if you were dying, you could try something without having to import something illegally from Europe or sneak to some dubious clinic in Mexico. And that experimentation would save other lives later because we'd learn from that, from allowing people the freedom to choose. I'd argue further, as we should have learned from the fall of the Soviet Union, government agencies just don't do things very well. And if you just took away the FDA's monopoly, private groups would step in that would do the testing job better, cheaper, faster, more reasonably. I don't know who they might be. It's a fatal conceit to predict how markets will work, but maybe Consumer Reports would do it, or Underwriters Laboratories. They're already testing 18,000 electrical products. But isn't leaving us the choice what America's supposed to be about? Patrick Henry never said, give me absolute safety or give me death. It's supposed to be about freedom. Let's look at the other layer of safety protection we have in America, and that's the trial lawyers. Now, I should like what they do. I mean, they're a free market solution, a supplement to Adam Smith's invisible hand. They're the invisible fist. If you behave badly, they will come and punish you for your bad behavior. Better than government passing clumsy one-size-fits-all rules. So, in theory, this should be a good thing. The lawyers will deter bad behavior and compensate the victims. But in practice, the lawyers have so gamed the system that it's gone horribly wrong, and it benefits mostly them. For every person they help, they hurt 10 at least. First of all, what kind of compensation system is it that's so clumsy and blunt? A medical malpractice study found in medical cases that most of the people who are victims of malpractice never collect. 2% file and win a suit. And of those who do collect medical malpractice claims, most were not victims of medical malpractice. This is just a very clumsy way to bring justice. And then they say they compensate the victims. And they do. But what kind of compensation system is it where it takes 10, 15, 20 years for the victim to get her money? And most of the money doesn't even go to the victim. Most of it goes to the lawyers. Now, you may say, what do you mean most of it goes to the lawyers? The plaintiff's lawyer only takes 30 or 40%. But if you add that to the defense lawyer costs and the court costs, almost 70% goes to the process. This is nuts. And then, worse, even, the other part of what they brag about isn't true. They say they make us safer by deterring this bad behavior. But by deterring bad things, they deter good things too. Because the big money that the lawyers want to make in filing suits is to file suits against the people we need the most, the people who stand on the edge of life and death, the people who deliver babies, the drug makers, the medical device makers, the paramedics. Heart pacemakers cost $3,000 more just to pay for the lawyers. But it's not the cost. It's the good, life-saving things we don't even get to have. I mean, right now in the Orlando Sentinel, they're talking about the bird flu, the avian flu from Asia. They don't know how many people it might kill. It's transferring from birds to people. They're talking about the Spanish flu, which in America killed 20 million people. I think this is scaremongering, but who knows? And we have bioweapons, anthrax, SARS, West Nile virus. We want more companies researching vaccines for these problems. Wouldn't that be good? And we used to have 25. But then the lawyers sued one of them, saying, your vaccine isn't as safe as it might have been. I don't know what the truth is. I suspect junk science. But let's say they were right and they saved a dozen lives. I don't think it's worth it anymore. Because when they sued, we had these 25 companies. Now we have 5 vaccine makers. We have this big shortage of the flu vaccine. And we have 5 instead of 25, partly because many of them got out of the business out of fear of lawsuits. They said, boy, you know, this one company got sued. We don't make that much off our vaccines to risk this kind of liability. Let's stick to our pimple cream business or our shampoo business. It's safer. But is America, are we safer with 5 companies making life-saving vaccines? No. But the lawyers are richer. There's a similar example with the man running for vice president now, John Edwards. He made his money. He won't say how much he made. Estimates are $40 to $80 million as one of these trial lawyers, plaintiff's lawyers. And most of it was for medical malpractice cases, and most of them were for cerebral palsy cases. He said that a child got cerebral palsy because the doctor did not do a C-section, that the child was starved of oxygen during birth, and if only he had done a cesarean section, the baby would have been born okay. Now, it's possible that he was right. You know, you can't prove these things for certain. Now the scientists say, well, we don't think so. We don't know that cerebral palsy is ever caused by that, and if it is, it's maybe 3% of the cases. But when he sued, 6% of births in America were C-sections. Now it's 26%. Now some of that's because the operation's better now. Some women are even picking it because it's convenient to give birth on a certain date. But it's an operation. It's much more dangerous than natural childbirth. It's more painful, more expensive, requires a longer hospital stay. You're 4 times as likely to die. That's the unintended consequence of the fear of the lawyers. Probably many more deaths. Now, has the cerebral palsy rate even gone down as we've gone from 6% to 26% after John Edwards and other suits? Not a bit. Made no difference. Rate of cerebral palsy is exactly the same. But the lawyers are richer. It's one more example of how the unintended consequence of how the fear of the lawsuit hurts us. They have now interfered with the information flow that in a free, open society not only makes life easier and more fun, but helps us keep ourselves alive. For example, nobody gives honest job references anymore. If a guy is lazy, you don't fire him and say he's lazy. You fire him and say, we agreed to part company, because you're afraid you might get sued. When American Airlines fires a pilot because he's drunk, they don't tell Delta. They're afraid to. This doesn't make us safer. Or how about labels? You ought to read the labels on things that warn you what's risky, that the microwave popcorn, don't open it like this. It might burn you if you do. But who reads labels anymore? Because out of cringing fear of the lawyers, companies smear warnings on everything. There are 41 warnings on a stepladder now. Or drug labels. Ever look at that? Ever look at a birth control pill label? I mean, we ought to read the labels on drugs. The label on the antibiotic tetracycline that says don't take it with milk. Won't work if you do. But who reads labels? I mentioned the birth control pill. You ever look at a birth control pill label? I happen to bring one here. tiny fine print, both sides of the page. So does this make us safer? No. Even the doctor doesn't read it. It makes us less safe. And if you read it, you wouldn't need the pill anymore. I was coming to learn that just leaving people alone in a society that gradually becomes smarter and richer, that'll protect us better than our rule makers in Tallahassee and Washington. Now, again, when I say this, people say, well, that'll work for us, we're educated, but what about the poor and the ignorant? You got to have these rules to protect them. But here, too, the market does it better. As an example, let's look at cars. I don't understand what makes one car safer than another or run better than another, and I assume most of you don't. But think about it. It's hard to get totally ripped off buying a car in Orlando. Compare the worst you can buy here with the best the planned economies could produce. That was the Trabant. Remember it? This little tin can, sardine can-like car out of East Germany. It was the pride of the Eastern Bloc. It disappeared as soon as the wall fell. So why? Why was their best unable to compete with our worst? Because not everybody has to be an expert for the market to work. You just need a few people, a few car buffs, or people who read the car magazines. And through word of mouth, the good news spreads. The good companies thrive. The bad ones atrophy. Freedom protects us better than government. And protects the ignorant, too. Now, I'm not claiming the market will take care of everything. We need some government. The worst places to live in the world are the places that don't have enough government. The African country where you're afraid to build a factory because you don't know that your neighbors won't steal what you make or the dictator won't take the whole factory. We need rule of law, and we need environmental rules. We need government to do a few things. But how much government do we need? And how do I get the first slide up? Sometimes this works. No. Can whoever's the slide person, I forgot to get schooled in this, and I don't know what to press. Here, I'll try that. That didn't work either. This went off. Okay, she'll come. So, how big should government be? Well, let's say what percentage of the economy? 2%, 5%, 10%? For the first 150 years of America, for most of our history, government was less than 5% of the economy. It's when we grew the fastest, when we settled the West. And yet government has only grown since then. It always grows. We have a chart here we're about to see, which shows that growth. It's gone from 5% of GDP now, not to 10%, which you could say more reasonable, but to 40%. 40% of the economy. And it's all happened relatively recently. This is a relatively new phenomenon since Lyndon Johnson days that government has grown so much. President Clinton said the era of big government is over, and he got thunderous applause from Republicans and Democrats. But since then, it's only grown more. They've added 700,000 pages of rules to the Federal Register since then. I mean, the regulators regulate. They're not doing their jobs if they don't. That's how they look at it. So it's, Thomas Jefferson said, it's the natural progress of things for government to gain and liberty to yield. Well, this isn't a good thing. Now, does somebody have a copy of my book that I can borrow for a moment here? Can you just... So I wrote a book about this, and suddenly my relationship with my peers changed. Now, the publisher picked the subtitle. I picked Give Me a Break, but they picked How I Exposed Hucksters, Cheats, and Scam Artists, and then became the scourge of the liberal media. I didn't like that because that implies I'm a conservative, and I'm a libertarian. I hold beliefs conservatives abhor. But they thought this would get conservatives to buy the book. I mean, I'm pro-choice. I think the war in Iraq was probably a mistake. I think the drug laws, sex laws are a mistake. but they call me a conservative because I believe in free markets. And I say things like I've just told you today. I talked about my change from focusing on business to now saying, give me a break, to government. And from that, and writing this, I get these weird reactions. I stopped winning Emmy Awards, for example. I won 18 when I was criticizing business. Now I win none. Some of my colleagues won't speak to me at ABC. Someone came up to me on the street the other day and said, "Are you John Stossel? I hope you die soon." I live in Manhattan where these kind of attitudes. So what's this anger about? It's a hatred of capitalism and free markets. Commerce, I don't get it. What's so terrible about commerce? It's voluntary, unlike government, which is forced. I mean, there's this weird moment that happens if you buy an ice cream cone. You know, you give her the buck, she gives you the cone, and you say, "Thank you, thank you." What's that? You're both saying thank you? What's that about? It's because you both win. That's what commerce is. You wanted the cone more than you wanted the buck. She wanted the buck more than she wanted the cone. Commerce is voluntary. We hate our employers who pay us, and we love the government, which forcibly takes a third of our money and squanders it. Because people just don't like, people are hostile to economic freedom. And in the name of perfect safety, this hostility is making us less safe. Let me narrow the rest of the discussion to safety issues. I once did a show that ranked risks, and it's in here on page, I forget what page. Can I flip this back? Perfect. Yeah, that worked. The best way to rank risks is to compare how many days does each risk take off the average life based on what age people are when they die from the risk. And here are some of them from the news that we cover. On the top, air crashes. I mean, that's big news, the plane crash. Got to cover that. But there have been fewer than 200 deaths over the past 20 years, average, even including September 11th from plane crashes. That's less than 1 day off the average life. Toxic waste refers to Superfund sites like Times Beach, Missouri, or Love Canal, New York. These dumps where companies left horrible chemicals in the ground. Now, there is no evidence these places hurt anybody. The stuff is bad, but it's in the ground. You're not drinking the dirt. And if they just left it there, scientists say it probably would be fine. But instead, in our search of perfect safety, we're spending hundreds of millions of your tax dollars, most of which has gone to lawyers so far, or half of which has gone to lawyers, to try to clean it up. And taking the most hysterical estimate I could get, which was from some environmental group claiming that maybe 1,000 Americans get cancer from these toxic waste sites. Assuming that were true and assuming all of them died, it still would be less than 4 days off the average life. Compare that to house fires, 5,000 deaths a year in America. A $10 smoke detector is a wonderful thing. Or murder, which leads the news, 20,000 deaths. I mean, if these were all the risks, you could say the press wasn't doing that bad a job. But you see what kind of bad job we're doing if you add driving to the charts. Because then all the other bars have to shrink. But car accidents aren't news. Driving isn't news. It's something we all do, but we don't think about it. But what this should make us think about is our coverage of plane crashes, for example. Because when the planes crash, we go nuts. We're here live at the scene. We don't know anything, but we're here live, and we'll keep telling you what we don't know live for hours. And when we do all that excess coverage, more people get scared of flying. Flying goes down. More people drive to Grandma's house, and that kills people. Statistical murder. Should also make you wonder about the person who drives farther to get to the organic food store. These bars get even more absurd if you add smoking, because then all the others have to shrink to almost nothing. 4 to 7 years off the average life. The smoker worries about getting brain cancer from his cell phone. And this is the bar that interests me most. It should say low income instead of poverty. Studies have shown that if you're below the poverty line in America, or in the lowest quintile of income in other countries, your life is 7 to 10 years shorter. Now, some of that's because poor people smoke and drink more, but most of it's because poor people can't afford some of the good stuff that keeps us alive. They drive older cars with older tires. They might not afford fresh fruit. They live in houses that are less safe. But what this means is that when we obsess, as we do constantly, over the risks at the top of the chart, some tiny benzene emission from some manufacturing process, that makes America a little poorer because capital can't flow to its best use. Wealthier is healthier. In Bangladesh, you have floods that kill thousands of people. In Florida, we have floods and almost nobody dies because you have wealth. You have cars to drive away, a radio to hear about the floods, dikes to divert the water. Wealthier is healthier. So if it takes longer to build the Millennium Mall because of some stupid regulations that are worrying about the tiny risks, if the western leg of the expressway in Orange County is delayed because of unnecessary worries about the river, if school money is spent, forgive me for doing this, to hire her to do this, and there are no hearing impaired people in the room, I don't know if there are. All that means is that capital doesn't go to its best use. That kills people too. I mean, the headline should be new OSHA rule to save 4, kill 20. But we don't see that because reporters don't think that way. And please forgive me for using you as an example here. I hope there are hearing impaired people in the room. Let me close so we have more time for questions with one last example of how I think our bad reporting and our new fear has made us frightened of the very things that could help us. Let's say you're the regulators. Clearly, we've got to have some regulation. We don't want a free market in nuclear weapons. So let's say you're the regulators. I'm a greedy businessman, and I have a new product I want to introduce. Given what's going on in the Mideast, let's say my new product is a new fuel. No cheaper than oil, but same price. And it'll reduce our dependence on OPEC. So that'll be a good thing. Trouble is, let's say my fuel, unlike oil, which is flammable, let's say my fuel is let's say it's explosive and invisible and odorless and deadly poisonous. And I want to pump it into your house. So should this new fuel be approved? Let me do a ambush interview and ask you about that. Do you want this new fuel?
No, I don't. Those odds don't sound good to me. I'm pretty clumsy, and I'd probably pump it into the wrong place and explode.
It's a reasonable answer. And what if I would promise you it would only kill 20 Americans a year?
I don't believe you because you're a greedy businessman.
What? What kind of stove do you have?
It's from Sears. I don't know. It's electric. It's an electric stove. Is it?
Shucks. I was hoping she would say gas stove because that's the fuel I'm talking about. Gas stoves, half the country has them. Invisible, odorless, deadly, poisonous, highly explosive. You may say, what do you mean odorless? It has this smell, but that's only because they add mercaptan to it so you can smell it before it blows you up. But it doesn't kill 20 Americans a year. It kills 400 of us a year. But we accept it because it's old. We got it before we got so frightened. We got it before we set all these rules. We accept coal, which is nasty, horrible stuff, but we're terrified of nuclear power, which may be safer. How about I want to introduce something even less useful than natural gas. A toy, a recreational device. We'll have fun with it, but we don't need it. Trouble is, it'll kill 800 Americans a year, mostly little children, toddlers who will die slowly with brain damage as vegetables in their parents' care. Anybody want to guess what I'm talking about? What was this?
Tickle me Elmo.
Tickle me Elmo. How does that kill people?
I don't know. I just want to kill him.
That's another story. Anybody else here? Bicycles are a good guess. 800 deaths a year from bicycles. But they're more than a toy. They're transportation, and they don't cause that brain damage. Balloons, good guess. That's an example of the open society working. Word has gotten out that babies shouldn't be given balloons. They choke on balloons, and I think they cause very few deaths. Gum? I don't know. I think you swallow I don't know that anybody dies from gum. Buckets. Well, buckets, amazingly, kill dozens of people every year. Children fall into them and drown. I mean, it's a big country. Lots of nasty stuff happening to people. The thing I was talking about, this girl over here got it, and he got it.
Swimming pools.
Would they be approved today? I want to put big tanks of water in people's backyards, and they'll kill 800 of us. I don't think so. What? Pretzels. No, we're done with it. We're moving on now. I don't think pretzels kill anybody. The government might approve swimming pools, but they would require razor wire fences or armed government guards. Cars, would they be approved? I don't think so. I have a new form of transport. It'll pollute, but differently from the old form. There will be more air pollution, but there'll be less solid waste. That'll be a good trade-off, less shoveling. Trouble is, people will drive, it'll weigh a ton, and people will drive it at 50 miles per hour, inches from people. No way it would be approved. And we're going to let 16-year-olds drive them. Airplanes, we're going to allow they have aluminum tubes fly over cities with hundreds of people in them. My point is that what's happened to us? Why did we become so wimpy to let government make all these decisions for us? Some people want to take more risks. They go skydiving, or they do it for money. They go put out oil well fires in Kuwait. We learn from that experience, and that saves other lives later by allowing people the freedom to take risks. Clearly, something is off in the debate today in the public, because all you hear from the media are scare stories. And it's true, in the past 50 years, we've been exposed to things humans have never been exposed to before. Invisible chemicals, food additives, mysterious radiation. But what's the result? We're so amnesiac about history, we forget that at the turn of the last century, most people my age were dead already. What's increased lifespans 30 years is the very technology we now fear so much. The founders fought a war for liberty. We are voluntarily giving it back bit by bit. I hope you fight for that freedom that makes all good things possible. Thank you very much. There are mic stands on the sides for anybody who wants to ask a question or issue vicious criticism or anything you want for another 10 minutes or so. What a shy group.
Oh, do I get to go first?
You get to go first. And thank you for using my tape in your class.
You're very welcome, Mr. Stossel. My name is Bill Gombash. I remember my father's 1960 Pontiac with a metal roof, metal dashboard, no safety belts or anything like that. Today, when I look at my car, I see a much safer vehicle. Considering how much the auto manufacturers dragged its legs when it came to seat belts and other safety things, including airbags, are you saying that market forces would have made a safer car today without those regulations that we had in 1960?
Yes, but I'm saying it weakly. It's a hard argument to make because clearly they didn't go to seat belts until they were ordered to. But again, the law of unintended consequence and the law of government not doing things very well also takes effect, and that people want safety in a car. There are some people who don't, and they should have a right to buy cars with metal dashboards if they want. But that's a selling point. And while we got seatbelts sooner because of government intervention, I would bet now if we, instead of having one government rule, seatbelts were an innovation that came customer-driven, we would now have 6 types of seatbelts to choose from, and they all would be more comfortable and easier to use than the government-mandated seatbelt, and more people would wear them now, and that would save more lives in the long term. But it's a theoretical argument. It's my weakest argument for saying government should stay out, because this may be one area where, at least in the short term, they have saved lives. But I think in the long term, the market would have done it.
Thank you, sir.
I'll go this way then. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments. Makes me think a lot, and sometimes think these days we're victims of stupidity in America more than anything. However, what really frightens me is the concentration of capital at very large levels, kind of things that American people had to address early part of the century when oil companies and railroads had acquired control of about 80% of all capital. I don't think there's anything that would stop John D. Rockefeller short of the federal government. That phenomenon really frightens me. I'm wondering if you share a similar concern, and also I'd like to know what you think is the proper role of government in our lives.
Well, last first, I think the proper role of government is to keep us safe, to pass some pollution rules and enforce them, to enforce contracts, to local government to create some kind of welfare safety net, and otherwise to butt out and leave us alone if we're not directly harming anybody else. Antitrust law, which is what you're talking about, being afraid of the Rockefellers, could be part of that, and I used to think that, but the more I looked at that, the more I saw was that most of these big, fat, piggish capital hoarders lose on their own. It wasn't long ago everybody said, IBM is so big that nobody can innovate in the market. And then all these other companies, including Bill Gates working out of his garage, cleaned their clocks. When the monopoly-type company gets fat and happy and raise their prices, then these little companies come in and beat them. People worry about media concentration. Clear Channel owns too many radio stations. But we forget that not many years ago, there was Walter Cronkite saying, that's the way it is, and that's about all we had. We had 3 white men giving the news on national TV. Now we have all these sources, radio, the blogs on the internet, hundreds new magazines. This concentration doesn't threaten me. And if it ever got too big, people hate corporations anyway. A government could just break them up, as they moved to do with Microsoft. And the other big part is that there are only 2 ways to do things, voluntary and force. And voluntary is the best. I mean, that's how we pick our husbands, our wives, our hobbies, our jobs, our music and movies, and that works great. Force is government and litigation. And we ought to keep that to a minimum. Business, even big business, is in the voluntary sector. They can't make you do anything. You don't have to buy their product. You can always buy somebody else's. Yes, sir.
Hi. About the big business not making you do anything, they scare you into doing things, with the advertisement. Well, if you don't take this pill, you'll die. It's FDA approved, so there's no problems. But at the end of the commercial, you have all these warnings: may cause bleeding, may cause death, may cause your liver to fall out. I mean, who knows? And these big businesses, they scare people into doing things, into buying things, and they just make our lives harder. And by volunteering that we're going to pick a different drug, I mean, that's not really doing anything. I mean, what do we as a people do against, all these problems in our government that you're talking about? I mean, what is our choice? What can we do?
To me, you're mixing things up in your question. You're saying business, what can we do about these businesses?
Yeah.
You don't have to do anything. If you don't like what they're doing, don't buy their product. They may scare you, they may try to scare you, and that's what I reported on for years, thinking it's terrible. We got to have government to clean this up, and then I saw government never did. They just got a bunch of regulators richer, and they never did anything. And people wised up eventually, and they didn't buy the stupid products. They aren't hurting you because they can't use force. Government keeps growing, and taxation is force. If you don't think it is, don't pay your taxes, and you'll find marshals with guns will come and forcibly take your money. Business doesn't worry me. Big government does. Yes, sir.
First thing I want to do is make a comment. If you think you've got problems here with regulations, you want to try Europe. But I do have a question on the economic impact of both immigration, legal and illegal immigration to the country, for as far as the economics are concerned of the whole argument.
Just to answer in order that, yes, Europe has more regulation. It always grows. Europe is an older society, and it's one of the reasons America has surpassed Europe in job creation is because they're over-regulated. It's very hard to get rid of these things. And immigration used to be a wonderful thing because people came in, worked hard, and benefited all the people already here. Now that we have a huge number of people around the world who want to kill us, immigration is a tougher question. Also, now we have a welfare state. As Milton Friedman says, you can't have open borders in a welfare state because then you invite people to come in to freeload. I would say, by and large, immigration has been good for America, but we do need some rules. Yes, sir.
Yes, hi. Just had a question. I wanted to know what's your position on outsourcing. I've heard both sides of the presidential debate. They both have they make good points when it comes to the subject, but I'm not really sure what to think of it. So I just want to know your position.
What I heard in the presidential debate was only one side, that it's evil, the jobs are going over there. And I believe in the other side, that it's okay. America has lost in the past 10 years 305 million jobs. But America has created 322 million jobs. There is a constant movement of jobs going out. That makes people in India richer. They are working on American-made computers. This openness makes everybody richer. I think the people who scare people about outsourcing and threaten to restrict trade of it because of it are only going to hurt poor people. Yes, ma'am.
I have just learned that everybody was born on three rights: life, liberty, and property. And liberty seems the one that's hard to get. Since it's so hard, how can we get to economical freedom since we only have few liberty? And those people that actually enjoy the three usually seems to be those politicians. Then how can we people and citizens be able to enjoy the liberty and actually maybe use the economical approach and the economical freedom?
I apologize. I only understood about half of that. And okay, how do we enjoy?
I'll make it simple. People usually don't have as much liberty as we deserve, and those that have liberty seems to be those politicians. Now, how can we pursue economical freedom since we only have little liberty?
Well, I think in America we have real liberty compared to other countries. We keep chipping away at it. I just hope you point out to people that every time they pass a law with good intentions, they are taking away some freedom from somebody. And every time you repeal a law, you create opportunity and freedom for people. Takes me away.
Yes,
sounds like
I
jail.
Hope so. My question may seem a little trivial to a lot of people here probably, but I was just wondering what your opinion was on the viability of animal rights organizations and what they do in pertaining to the meat and dairy industry, and if there would be any incentive for the meat and dairy industry to protect animals more without the government being involved?
Well, you're contradicting yourself. The government being involved or animal rights organizations being involved?
I'm talking about private animal rights organizations.
So that's the market work. That's fine. That's the open society. If PETA and a bunch of animal rights organizations wants to picket people who wear fur coats and buy veal and tell you you're doing something cruel and persuade you not to, this will make some businesses treat animals better and make some animals not exist at all, because some exist in America only because they're raised for use as food. That's the way it ought to work. If government comes in and says, you know, we think vegetarianism is kinder and no one can eat meat, that's a big difference. That's the force of government, and that's not how it should be done, though at the rate we're going, that's how it will be done. And thank you all. I have books if you want them.